Coming up next on Tech News Weekly, it's me, Jason Howell, my co-host Mikah Sargent, and we've got a lot of stuff to talk about this week. I mean, there's been some really big news, and so we've got interviews on Google's FLoC and how it's replacing it with topics. But is that actually better for privacy? We'll find out. Also, IRS.gov is going to be requiring facial scanning for online access, and that has people very concerned. Amazon has a high school class on business, and we're wondering how critical it really is of its own business practices. I'm guessing not very much. And finally, the broadening gulf between Android and iOS updates. All that and more coming up next on Tech News Weekly.
Podcasts you love
from people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 219, recorded Thursday, January 27th, 2022.
This episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Nareva. Traditional audio conferencing systems can entail lots of components, installation can take days, and you might not get the mic coverage you need. That's expensive. But Nareva Audio is easy to install and manage, no technicians required, and you get true full room coverage. That's easy economical. Learn more at Nareva.com.
And by Acronis. Have you dreamed of bringing your IT skills to your favorite sport franchise? Make that dream a reality. Learn more about the Acronis #TeamUp program for service providers at go.acronis.com/twit-3.
And by Barracuda. Every 11 seconds, there's a new ransomware attack, costing companies millions of dollars. Barracuda says, don't pay the ransom. Build your ransomware protection plan now. Go to barracuda.com/TNW. Hello, and welcome to Tech News Weekly, the show where every week we talk to and about the people making and breaking the tech news. I am one of your hosts, Mikah Sargent.
And I'm the other guy, Jason Howell. It's good to see you, Mikah. Thank you so much for covering for me while I was snowboarding practically 7 days out of that entire week. It was amazing.
I am glad you got the most out of that vacation. Yeah, I was very impressed that you spent pretty much all of the time on the mountain. Would have slept there if you could have.
Yeah, right. Well, maybe not so much, but it was still amazing the way we did it. So thank you.
Awesome. Let's get right into the show today. You may or may not have heard about Google, maybe or maybe not, making some changes to the way it does or does not track you online. There's a lot to get into here with Google's FLoC. And joining us today is Issie Lapowsky of protocol.com. Welcome, Issie.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're glad to have you here. So the kind of starter question that I have for you is, if you could please start by explaining what FLoC is. This is something that Google had announced a while ago, and I think that we could all use a bit of a refresher on FLoC before we get into what's changing.
Right. It's such a simple question. I wish it had a simple answer. But FLoC is basically part of Google's plan for killing off the third-party cookie, which it announced in response to the idea that, cookies are kind of creepy. They allow third parties to track all of the things that you do across the web on an individual basis. So Google said, you know what? We're going to change it, and we're going to replace cookies with something called FLoC, short for Federated Learning of Cohorts, which is really just the most catchy name. And what FLoC does essentially, or plan to do essentially, is rather than allowing a cookie to track you on an individual basis, your browser would more or less monitor your behavior and filter you into a cohort based on that behavior, and other users in that cohort would have demonstrated similar behavior. So publishers would then see your cohort ID. They wouldn't know what it stood for, but they would be able to target understanding that this cohort has some kind of similarity, right? Now, Google said this is a lot better than the cookie. This is, a lot more privacy protective because you don't know which individual is doing what. These cohorts are large enough that everybody kind of blends in with the crowd. But privacy advocates said not so. If I have, any sort of other identifying information about your browser, maybe because you logged in with a single sign-on type of tool, or maybe on Facebook and I have a lot of information about your interests, I can use these cohort IDs to sort of infer things about your interests and infer things about, furthermore, the other people in your cohort, even if I've never met them before, right? So there was a lot of concern that FLoC was not as private as Google was making it out to be. On the flip side, the ad industry was not thrilled with FLoC either, because they said, hey, wait a minute, Google, you're still going to have access to all of this data. You still own the browser. You can still see everything, and you are our competitor. So a lot of folks in the ad industry went crying to antitrust and competition regulators saying Google's trying to hoard all the data for itself and cutting us out.
Yeah, that was one of the things that kind of stood out there, whenever you were explaining FLoC, is that the browser is still doing all of that tracking, and so they get to see everything that's still happening. It's just what everybody else gets access to afterwards is obscure. That's correct?
Right. And so over the course of all of this backlash to FLoC, Google did make a series of commitments around, we will also use the data that we are providing to other, third-party ad tech firms. We'll also use that same data in our ad systems. The concern is, okay, but Google's a lot bigger than just an ad system. Yeah, that's a huge part of its business, but it's got a lot of other stuff going on, and all of that data is still absorbed by the monolith that is Google.
Understood. So we kind of talked about the reaction at the time to FLoC, with the privacy advocates on one hand and then the ad tech folks on the other hand, kind of both being unhappy. In response to this, Google said, okay, not FLoC, but let's introduce something new. Can you talk about that new thing and how this is supposed to be different from what FLoC was?
Right. So Google killed off FLoC this week, which was kind of a long time coming. You could see that they were kind of changing their mind on it for a while. They replaced it with something called Topics. Topics is an API that will essentially look at your browsing behavior on an individual level, and it will filter that into topics that you're interested in. And these topics will be picked from, a few hundred topics, things like, fitness, very broad ideas. And then the Topics API will relay to publishers what topics you're interested in, so they can serve ads based on those topics. Those topics will change out every few weeks, so they won't be static, and they'll basically lose importance over time, but they will allow advertisers to target you in a way that's based on your broader web browsing behavior. And so once again, this rings alarm bells for privacy folks, because they say, contextual advertising is great. Sending me a sports related ad because I'm on ESPN.com, all good. But there's no reason why some complete other website that has nothing to do with sports and that maybe I haven't even gone to before should know anything about my interest in sports. So that's really their concern. Meanwhile, Google is saying, hey, look, this is a lot better, because whereas FLoC was just kind of automatically generating these cohorts based on interests that were, potentially sensitive in nature, Topics is going to be really stripped down. It's going to be a human curated list of topics, so we don't get into a lot of that sensitive stuff. And it's better than what we have right now, which is cookies. So that's Google's argument. The privacy argument is a little bit different. But at least some privacy folks say this is better than FLoC.
Interesting. So there are some privacy advocates who are happier with Topics than they are with the original FLoC. I mean, because on the face of it, it's FLoC says, we are going to look at your browsing history or we're going to look at your browsing activity, and then we're going to sort you into groups based on your browsing history or browsing activity. And then Topic says, we're going to look at your browsing activity, and then we're going to sort you into groups based on your browsing activity. On the face of it, they don't sound too different, but privacy advocates are happier because of the human curation involved. Is that what kind of sets it apart, that it's these groups that are chosen based on an actual human being? And how does Google choose who that human being is? I know this is kind of a spur of the moment question, but I'm so curious about kind of that, how this is supposed to be better.
That's right. It's not one person deciding what these topics are. There is already a list. I believe it's 350 topics. I presume there are teams and teams and teams working on that list. And so privacy advocates say at least Topics makes it harder to do something called browser fingerprinting, which is when you haven't, I don't have exactly all of your information, but I can cobble together enough information to know it's your browser when I'm seeing your browser clicking on a certain website, right? There's another thing that we haven't talked about that I should have brought up in the first explanation of Topics, which is that Google has introduced some controls for users. So if you check your topics and you don't like that it has a topic related to, I don't know, your interest in fashion or whatever it might be, you can take that out. Now, that's nice, and user controls are better than not having user controls, but what's best is to offer privacy in the first place. So a lot of the folks that I talked to said, it would be better if people were opting in to having their topics inferred, rather than Google having this be the default state. And then, if I'm a really determined privacy hawk, I can go into my settings every 3 weeks and delete my topics that I don't want to be in there, right? Like that's kind of an impractical use case that most people who use the Chrome browser, which is most people, are not going to take advantage of.
Right. And that kind of becomes the argument, I think, for a lot of both privacy advocates and just tech folks in general is, sure, we put in all of these practices and these methods of trying to help people take control of their privacy. But a lot of times folks don't know what that means, how to go about doing that. I can remember article after article online showing you, here's what Facebook thinks about you. You can go to this page and learn what it thinks you do and are, and you can delete what you don't want. And I remember having to go and make a correction in Twitter because it kept trying to serve me foreign language options all the time. And I'm like, I don't speak another language. And it was because of something that I happened to click on. So it's interesting to see kind of how, for the most part, folks aren't too enthused about this new wave of things. But one thing that I am curious about, Google and wanting to sort of rid everyone of the third-party cookie, what is the big argument for why the third-party cookie is a bad idea? Why are we trying to look for something new instead of the third-party cookie? Just, a sort of a clarification on that.
Yeah, I think there's just an awakening about privacy. Why should a company I've never heard about, and most people have never heard of, all of these ad tech firms, be able to know exactly what I'm doing as I'm doing it all across the web and be able to share that information with other publishers? And it just becomes like this endless data spill that you don't know where to even begin to try to claw that back. And Google knows that. I think the public is getting hip to that. I think regulators are moving on that. So I think it's sort of like in the ether that Google knows it has a big role to play here.
Absolutely. Okay, my final question for you is, just as a person who has paid attention to this in general and is looking at these different privacy concerns, do you think there's a solution that will make everyone happy? And if not, if you could sort of read the crystal ball, as it were, do you have any idea where you think Google might lean? Are they going to try to more satisfy privacy advocates and privacy concerns, or are they going to lean more towards satisfying ad networks, ad tech folks? Because an example, Apple mostly was okay with upsetting ad tech folks for the sake of user privacy. Google, came out with FLoC in the beginning, saw the issues there, and then came out with this idea. Are we going to see more iterations on this? And do you think Google will fall more toward one way or the other?
It's hard to say. I mean, what I think we can know for sure is that Google is going to protect the ad-sponsored internet at all costs. That is how it's made its, billions, trillions. So that's where Google's loyalty lies, right? And obviously it has a lot of wiggle room to impact the data that third parties can get, even as it continues to collect data. But more and more, it is facing a lot of scrutiny and pressure from antitrust regulators. And they're kind of at odds with the privacy folks saying, well, wait a minute, Google, you're going to make the world more private, but in doing so, you're going to entrench your own market position? I don't know about that. And so, I think that Google is kind of in a tough spot right now. Is there a solution that is going to satisfy everybody? Absolutely not, because, an entire gigantic industry is on the line here. And the only thing that folks on the other side of that industry, the privacy advocates, will be satisfied with is the end of targeted advertising. And so I don't think you find a middle ground that really makes everyone happy.
Understood. Issie, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. If folks want to follow you online and check out all your great work, where can they go to do so?
They should go to protocol.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at Issie Lapowsky.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All righty, folks. Up next, a widely popular facial recognition platform has had a bit of a, what do we call that? A bit of a time
broiled in a snafu.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
They've had to confess. There we go. A little walkabout. We'll get to that in just a moment, but I want to tell you that this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Nareva. Complicated and costly. That has been the state of audio conferencing for larger spaces for a long time. Choosing a traditional system might entail difficult design software and selecting from a dizzying array of separate mics, speakers, DSPs, and more. Installation usually requires outside technicians and is often highly invasive and expensive. It could take your room offline for days. The industry was definitely primed for the same type of leap in technology that had transformed and simplified other sectors. Nareva made that leap when they created revolutionary microphone mist technology. With this patented technology, 1 or 2 integrated microphone and speaker bars fill a room with thousands of virtual microphones. There are no dead zones, and everyone can be heard everywhere in the room. Meeting and class participants can simply talk and move naturally in the space and still be heard by remote participants. Thanks to continuous auto calibration, your rooms are instantly and always ready with optimized audio. No outside technician required. Nareva also simplified installation. It's a 30-minute DIY job. That means big savings on time and cost compared to traditional systems. They simplified management too. Nareva Console gives IT the power to monitor, manage, and adjust their systems from anywhere. No need for IT to go room to room. So ask yourself if you want to go with the costly and complicated traditional system or make the leap to simple and economical Nareva. Learn more at Nareva.com. That's NUREVA.com. Thank you, Nareva, for sponsoring this week's episode of Tech News Weekly. Jason Howell, take it away.
All right, they're coming for our faces. Get ready. This isn't the only time that that's happened. And by the way, I mean the IRS. And by coming for our faces, I don't actually mean they're going to take your face. But it is going to be scanned, and it is going to be stored in an online database. And usually that means at some point there could be a really big, amount of trouble down the line. Those databases aren't 100%, perfectly, sanctioned off from anyone who wants to get access to it. So that's the big concern here. And joining us to talk about this new requirement for U.S. citizens who are managing their taxes online is Tonya Riley from Cyberscoop. Welcome to the show, Tonya.
Thanks, Jason, for having me.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for coming on to talk about this. This is a crazy story. I feel like in the past 7 days, this has just morphed and transformed. And so I'm really happy to have you on to talk about it. So it has developed pretty swiftly over this past week, like I said. So maybe set the stage a little bit. What was the initial acknowledgement? How did that come about? Who exactly does this apply to? What are the specifics there?
Mm-hmm. So I think one of the reasons the story got crazy so quickly is that there wasn't a highly publicized announcement from the IRS. So the first kind of rumblings we got about it was when journalist Brian Krebs decided to walk through the system himself and set up his own credentials. And as we've seen before with other stories about ID.me, there were a lot of issues getting set up and a lot of wait times. And, anytime, as you said, anytime we're talking about the IRS taking our facial biometrics, there's going to be a lot of interest. So that kind of created a little bit of an information gap. And the IRS did eventually come out and say, so this will apply to U.S. citizens starting in summer 2022. You don't have to sign up through ID.me right now. But the thing is, by the summer you'll have to. And this is for just an account on the IRS's website. So that's where you would check your tax records, check your child income tax records. But it is not necessarily where you need to file your taxes. So you don't have to have ID.me just to file taxes. So that is maybe one relief for some people.
Yeah, that's at least a little bit of relief, right? Like, and some people aren't even, accustomed to or even using the site for anything anyway. So I suppose there's that, but a lot of people do. And something like this, especially now, the past few years in particular, facial recognition news is usually there's just so much attention to our privacy. Kind of the last story we talked a lot about privacy as well, and people are more adept, more aware about the value of maintaining their privacy online and the risks associated with this. So when you take facial recognition systems that already have their inherent flaws, and then you put it into a government kind of requirement for access of something that we all, at least as U.S. citizens, have to pay close attention to, our taxes and all that stuff. It's kind of a recipe for potential, disaster down the line. There was some confusion there's a lot of confusion, but one thing in particular is the type of face matching that's going on here. And you wrote about this, the one-to-one versus one-to-many. What are the differences between these two systems? How does it impact the integrity of the process, and what's going to be applied here with ID.me?
Right. So most privacy and technology experts will tell you that these are both forms of facial recognition. A lot of times companies will use the term face matching as kind of an evasion of that. But so one-to-one face matching is when it's basically what your iPhone does when you're using your Face ID. It's trying to match your face with a known image of your face. So it's just you to you. One-to-many is when it's taking an image of your face and trying to match it against a whole database. So, right, that's the kind of technology we see with policing and what Immigrations and Customs uses. It's what the DMV uses. So we see this one-to-many where it's not just you and your face, it's you and a whole bunch of people. One of the key differences here, and privacy advocates will say both of these types of technology comes with dangers, but the thing that makes one-to-many a little different is you're introducing a lot more risk of inaccuracy. And we've seen that time and time again in government study. There are issues with it being less accurate on darker skin tones, issues if the photo just isn't good quality. And that's one of the reasons, services like Amazon's Recognition have gotten into a lot of heat in recent years, and why there's been a push to make sure that law enforcement is not using these technologies. You go from okay, I can't open my iPhone to a false arrest, or I can't get my unemployment benefits. It's a very different kind of situation.
Yeah, and you mentioned unemployment benefits. You're mentioning something that specifically happened last June. There were complaints that the facial recognition verification used by ID.me, which I guess one of my questions there is, okay, so they've been using this already. But anyways, to get back on track, actually resulted in people being locked out of their unemployment benefits because they were being improperly identified. So, it's already happened in that scenario. You can only imagine that it's going to happen. And I mean, with any technology, right, there's a certain percentage of failure that's just inherent in the way technology works. But when it's something as critical as like taxes or unemployment, that has really powerful and impactful. It affects people's lives. At the end of the day, it's something that they have to pay attention to. Are they addressing that at all in the last week as we've kind of gone through the motions around this story? Are they addressing the integrity of the system?
Yeah, so I have not seen the IRS specifically address this complaint or what would happen if, the system was rolled out and it wasn't working for people, what the alternatives would be. The company has taken a lot of steps to address this. Their kind of overall argument is that, and to your point, there's inaccuracies with every technology. Their argument is that we're still doing this better than what the government had been doing. We're still helping reduce more fraud. And it's really hard to get good data in terms of how many people are being rejected, how long the wait times actually are. The company will, the most recent statistic they released was that it was like an 8-minute wait time and I guess I'll backtrack and explain the technology. So basically, if the matching process doesn't work, they'll escalate you to a human to kind of like check your documents and check your face, and that would be the next step. But as we've seen in some of these reports, as it's been used in the States for unemployment, that waiting for a human assistance can take hours, it can take a day. There are some people that have reported, it's been over a year, and just because of the way things turned out with verification, they still haven't gotten benefits. So, it all kind of boils down to like, what are the averages? Like, is this technology better than not using it? And I think it's just really hard to say because A, we don't have a good data on this, and B, the government kind of rushed into using it.
Yeah. And I also want to touch on something that you mentioned briefly because I think it's also important. There's an inherent kind of level of discrimination, the potential of discrimination when talking about facial recognition systems. And again, this is something that's been in the news and in the politic of the U.S. for so long, and especially intensely the last few years. How could that come into play with a system like this as it relates to our taxes and access to our taxes?
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's really hard to say when we don't know what the accuracy levels are for the system, but as with any one-to-many facial recognition technology, like there's a high risk that it's going to be disproportionately inaccurate on people of color, sometimes on women. And I think the other kind of inequity issue that we need to talk about that isn't just, how the technology works is we're talking about verifying yourself with a front-facing camera or having a certain level of technical know-how. And for a lot of Americans, particularly older Americans, they don't have that, or lower-income Americans. Right. I was on a panel recently about unemployment benefits and modernizing the technology, and one of the panelists said something to the effect of, maybe ID.me will work for 80% of the population, but it's that other 20% that we still need to reach with, human interaction or just a phone call. So there are a lot of inequity issues out there, even outside of the AI element of it.
Yeah, no question. What about ID.me's privacy policy? What do we know about kind of how they retain this data and try and protect it just as much as they possibly can before the inevitable moment that something like this gets tapped into? What have they specified there?
Right. So in terms of retention, we know that up to 7 years or 7 whole years after you close out an account with the company, they have to retain the data, and that actually is a federal requirement. So even if you're like, okay, I don't want my account tomorrow, they'll still have that data for 7 years. They have said to reporters, including myself, that they're the only ones that keep this data. They don't share it with, Amazon or some of these third parties. In terms of who has access to it within the company, I don't really know. But I think the bigger problem here is that their privacy policy is pretty opaque. And, that's true of most tech companies. I don't think the average person can go into most privacy policies and understand what they're talking about. But there are a lot of blanket statements in there that some experts have raised issues with. It says, well, we won't share anything unless you consent. But then it says, well, if we think, there might be some risk of harm, then we're going to share it anyway. And in terms of working with law enforcement, there's a lot of gray area there, which is concerning when you're working with an agency like the IRS, which has in the past shared information with ICE, right? So there's a lot of kind of in between like contradictions that would take someone with more legal knowledge than me to sort out.
Yeah, understood. Well, this is a complicated scenario, of course, and I'm sure we're only seeing the beginning of this. Be really curious to see if the pushback moves us towards any sort of change in plan. I don't know that I feel very optimistic about that, but I'm curious to see where it all lands. So Tonya Riley, thank you so much for hopping on with us today and talking about this. Cyberscoop.com is where you can go to read Tonya's article, write up about this. Really great article. If people want to follow you online, where can they find you?
Well, first, thanks for having me. And you can find me on Twitter at Tonya Jo Riley. Or just go to my Cyberscoop profile and click from there. But if you have any stories you want to reach out about, please do. Excellent.
All right. Thank you so much, Tonya. Have a great day. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Take care. All right. Coming up, what do they actually teach at Amazon High School? Well, it's a course anyways that Mikah is going to talk about. This is a direction that I don't know that I necessarily had on my Amazon bingo card, but here we are. They do everything, don't they? So we're going to talk about that up next. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Acronis. With the Acronis #TeamUp program, you're going to get sports branding to promote your services, access to sports teams' social media channels, access to sports facilities for business events. It's a whole lot of sports and a whole lot more. In the world of elite sports, every advantage matters. That's why so many global sporting giants actually rely on extensive data collection and analysis to find their edge over the competition. We've heard about this a lot, right? And why more than 50 sports teams already partner directly with Acronis to help defend their workloads and keep them #CyberFit. As an official #CyberFit delivery partner, you're going to gain a competitive advantage through their new association with local or national sports teams. Partners actually benefit from official Acronis #CyberFit delivery partner designation, of course, but also unique sport-oriented branding materials. There's opportunities to create marketing content with sports stars. That sounds fun. Tickets to sporting events with VIP treatment and money can't buy experience. That sounds even more fun, actually. Autographed memorabilia, access to sports facilities for business events, unbeatable PR opportunities, and so much more. Now, becoming an Acronis #CyberFit delivery partner actually opens the door to the exciting world of professional sports for your business. It gives managed service providers an opportunity to connect with cutting-edge organizations, to cooperate and co-brand, and to have a genuinely amazing time while continuing to deliver Acronis's world-class cyber protection solutions. That all sounds really great. The world's greatest athletes and managers rely on Acronis solutions to protect their data and their hard-won edge over the competition. The same cyber protection technology that's trusted by the pros is also available to business and home users around the globe. So gain a competitive advantage with a great local or national sports team. Learn more about the brand exposure and marketing benefits that come with being an Acronis #TeamUp partner. All you got to do is visit go.acronis.com/twit-3 and you'll get started. That's go.acronis.com/twit-3. And we thank Acronis for their support of Tech News Weekly. All right, Mikah, it's time to go to school. Go to Amazon High.
Can you hear the school bell ringing? I certainly can, but it's just Jeff Bezos' voice saying, work harder.
Oh, no. Worst school ever. Worst high school ever.
So this is a really interesting story over on Vice, and it is about a high school in San Bernardino, California, where they are offering a program. It's called the Amazon Logistics and Business Management Pathway. This program has a series of courses that are meant to help students get started in a career in logistics. Amazon, according to Vice, donated $50,000 to the San Bernardino, California high school, Cajon, or I don't know if it's Cajon, it might be Cajon High School. And it was used, they got receipts and things through a Freedom of Information Act request, used to purchase books and all sorts of materials for the class. What's interesting is that the classroom where the Pathways program is taking place is painted up in Amazon colors, yellow and orange, and has Amazon's leadership principles written on the walls: customer obsession, bias for action, and deliver results. Now, that's the important part to understand there. It's also important to understand that for the most part, as I was reading through this, the courses are standard courses for setting someone up in a position to be in e-commerce or logistics. It is not 100% devoted to you going to work at Amazon, but one of the goals of the courses is as follows. Quote, work towards sustainability by coaching and advising logistics lead pathway teacher on how to establish and develop an effective industry partnership with Amazon. So there's one of the things that kind of pops up. Interesting, that is focused directly on Amazon. As part of the course, you are required to do an internship at one of the at a logistics or e-commerce company in the area. But what's interesting is that San Bernardino happens to be one of the largest locations for Amazon. It says, since 2012, Amazon has opened 14 Amazon fulfillment centers and 2 air hubs in San Bernardino County and its neighboring Riverside County, together known as the Inland Empire. So Amazon's Inland Empire is in San Bernardino, California. So while on the face of it, one could say that you can go work somewhere, like as part of the requirements, you have to get a gig at one of these e-commerce companies. It's pretty much going to be that they're going to go to Amazon because that's going to be the easiest thing. There are certain requirements, including reading and understanding the Amazon effect, doing an Amazon case study as they learn about how Amazon does its business, and other kind of concerning things if we're looking at the perspective of Amazon kind of guiding this this curriculum. Now, as the article points out, there are lots of different places where companies do sponsor programs at schools. And so this isn't the first of its kind in terms of a course that is sponsored by a company. In fact, it's kind of like an old school method. But what the concern was here is not just the way that Amazon has worked in a heavy focus on how Amazon does things in its studies, but also the fact that you're surrounding the students by the Amazon principles and the colors, and everyone is very aware that Amazon donated to make it possible for the course to exist. So on impressionable youth, there is this sort of like inundation of Amazon, 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 and they already live in a place, the Inland Empire, where Amazon trucks are everywhere. Amazon's airplanes are in the area. All sorts of stuff going on there. Excuse me. This isn't the only Amazon partnership that exists. Cajon High School's partnership. There's also the Amazon Future Engineers partnership, where Amazon works with high schools and middle schools to help students prepare for careers in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And with that program, you can tour Amazon fulfillment centers. You can chat with Amazon professionals, and teachers are eligible for a $30,000 teaching award. And then Amazon did announce a partnership with the Girl Scouts of America to provide for, increase in underrepresented groups in STEM. And the way that they're doing that is by giving Girl Scout and Brownie troops tours of Amazon fulfillment centers. So it's really interesting. Vice has a link, an embed in the article that shows the entire set of papers that they got about this, so that you can see kind of what the course involves, what you would be doing, and they're mostly 11th and 12th graders in the course. And I was reading, too, that a lot of college students in the area end up going and picking up shifts at Amazon because they can, pay for college by doing deliveries in Southern California. And so it's just, I think the big thing about this, because on its face, a big business that has a lot of money that does logistics. It'd be the same thing to me as in my hometown, the big, gigantic hospital that's in my hometown. They help fund courses at the technical college for teaching people how to be like EMTs and nurses and phlebotomists and stuff like that. In that way, it's the same. I think what sets this apart is how much Amazon absolutely rules this area. And again, as there's one college professor, I think, who they talked to, the way that these impressionable youths are being inundated. Let me get this quote. It says, the students are surrounded by these messages that are even above the subliminal levels. You walk into a classroom and you're surrounded by Amazon's leadership principles. It's not even just subliminal messaging. It's above the subliminal level that makes it pretty wild. It does concern me. There's another quote too. It saddens me that schools are in this situation that they quite willingly would take this money and then in the case of this particular classroom, make it into a shrine to Amazon. I think that's where people are kind of having trouble with this, is that it's so much more than just a class that can teach you how to get into the logistics business or the e-commerce business, but is becoming kind of this praise to Mother Amazon kind of situation here. I'm curious about your thoughts. You have school-aged children. Mine are all in college, so I don't have the perspective here. Would you have concerns if your kid said, "Hey, I want to do this Amazon course," or just in general, does this kind of inundation affect you, bug you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of going back and forth. I realize I have mixed thoughts on it, mixed feelings on it. Because, like Google and other companies, like you said, do this as well. Google offers, just like a partnership with Anaheim Union High School District, working with them for like career certificates in data analytics, IT support, other things. And that's a Google relationship with a high school. So on its face, I don't have a problem. I guess I feel like I don't have a problem with a company coming in and saying, "Hey, we've got a lot of money. We're also really good at logistics, and let's be real. Amazon, as far as enterprise is concerned, is about the shining example of pulling off logistics. They're really good at it. So if you really care about logistics and want to learn business through that lens, there probably aren't a whole lot better, sources to pull that information from. Putting aside the troubling aspects of how Amazon runs its business, and puts puts other businesses out of business and has union busting kind of qualities, within the company. I mean, there are troubling aspects too. So I find myself kind of mixed on it. I mean, I guess if my children aren't of the age to do something like this yet, right? They're still kind of in elementary school. But I think if they were a little bit older and something like this was offered at their school, I wouldn't immediately say no because it's Amazon, offering it. I think I would definitely enter into it with them through a critical lens and talk through some of these things with them and say, hey, just keep in mind, like, you're going into a classroom that is filled with and that's another part of the lesson, right? As a huge corporation, an enterprise, this is a decision that the company is making that in effect, in some ways, could be seen as like indoctrinating the youth into, affinity with the brand. It's also the same thing that a lot of the social networks do, like Google, prime example, right? Like they've got YouTube Kids. My kids have been using YouTube Kids, and that gives them some sort of familiarity with YouTube as a product and by extension Google. But apparently there's some benefit there because I chose to still allow them to do that. There's still good stuff on YouTube Kids, but is Google indoctrinating them and making them lifelong Google users? I don't know. I think it's really complex. I'm not immediately saying, oh my goodness, Amazon did this. Amazon should, not do this, because I think there is some value and some benefit there. But I think it needs to be really seen through a critical lens. And I don't know that Amazon, like, I just don't know. Like, I don't know, as a matter of fact, if Amazon in this coursework is critical about its own practices. I'm guessing it's probably not. But I think that's the whole view, right? Like, that's the whole story. And if the kids are getting that as well, then I think there's some real benefit to that. I don't know. That's helpful.
No, I agree. I from what I can read, they just, when it comes to those kinds of conversations, they just focus on sort of historically, because there is a course about unions and handling unions and what collective bargaining is and all that kind of thing. But it just sort of,
how do they teach that?
Yeah, it's not, it doesn't go into depth about like how we've attempted to stall unions or why unions are a good thing or a bad thing. It's just like, here's the bare facts.
Like is the course taught through the lens of, as Amazon, this is how we do things? Or is the course taught through the lenses, as Amazon, we are successful, here are things that we realize you need to know about the business of logistics? And if it's, this is Amazon, this is how we do things, then I think you also have to share, and they aren't going to want to do it, but you also have to share the bad decisions that they've made and why and what they've learned and everything. And I don't have a whole lot of faith that they're doing that, but I don't know that for sure. Maybe they do. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, from what they also quoted a college professor of business who said that the course is incredible. I think that the quote was very, very pro-business.
Of course.
So I don't think that there's, from what I'm reading, there's no education outside of like how to be the best business person you can be in logistics. So anyway, in any case, it is a really interesting story that everybody should go check out, and particularly read the embed that has kind of all the documents about the class. All right. With that, it is time for another break before we head into Jason's story of the week. And I get to tell you about Barracuda, who are bringing you this episode of Tech News Weekly. Every 11 seconds, there's a new ransomware attack. That's happened like how many times as we've been recording this show? My goodness. And they are taking such a toll on organizations that the U.S. government is now classifying them as terrorism. According to the 2021 Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, ransomware has more than doubled year over year. In its most recent Threat Spotlight research blog post, Barracuda identified and analyzed 121 ransomware incidents from August 2020 to July 2021, seeing a 64% increase in attacks year over year. You've seen the news. Oil pipelines, universities, corporations, all paying millions of dollars. Barracuda says don't pay the ransom. Instead, protect yourself and your company before a ransomware attack occurs. Here's how. 1, attacks start with an innocent-looking email trying to trick people into revealing their usernames and passwords. So you have to train your teams to recognize an attack and deploy anti-phishing technology. Then 2, you secure your web applications. File sharing services, web forms, and e-commerce sites often have weak points that hackers are looking for. Once they're in your applications, they go after your business data. So protect your applications, and then they can't get onto your network. And finally, 3, back up your data. Today's backup solutions make it simple and fast to protect archives and backup or restore an entire server or individual file. Quickly recover your data without paying the ransom. Barracuda says, hey, don't pay the ransom. Build your ransomware protection plan now before they strike. Just go to barracuda.com/TNW. That's barracuda.com/TNW. Thank you, Barracuda, for sponsoring this week's episode of Tech News Weekly. Let's hear about your story of the week, Jason.
Well, I have a story of the week, and then I looked at Tech News Weekly, not Tech News Weekly. That's what we do, Tech Meme, and saw just real quick mention that Meta has rebranded Oculus Quest to Meta Quest. And so you basically take the most well-known VR brand that exists and you wipe it out and you replace it with Meta. And I don't know if that's a good or a bad idea, but it seems kind of goofy. Like a bad idea to me.
That's how I feel about it.
Anyways, that's not my story of the week, though. My story of the week has to do with phone updates, which as an Android user is a continual frustration. And I'm curious to get your take on this. But there's an editorial on Vice that's titled, "Google is Forcing Me to Dump My Perfectly Good Phone." It's written by Aaron Gordon. Definitely a good read. You should check it out. I think it's a really good insight into a frustration that many Android users have shared. And Aaron bought the Pixel 3 just 3 years ago. He bought it brand new. You know, that's Google's flagship. It's only 3 years old. He says the phone's in great shape. The battery's still strong. And Aaron is unlike probably you and me, Mikah. Like, we are very used to always having the latest version of whatever phone or device that we're using. It's just kind of built, it's built into our career. Not only that, but it's just, that's kind of our habit. And I think a lot of TWiT, fans of TWiT probably fall into the same bucket. They just love technology so much. They want to be on the latest and greatest. It's just part of their routine, right? But not everybody's like that. I think the majority of people probably aren't. The majority of people buy it as if it's like an appliance. Like, I buy this phone and I'm going to use it until it doesn't work for me anymore. I'm going to move on. And Aaron is one of those people. But Google's support window for the Pixel 3 is ending. In fact, it just ended. I think there was just one final update that happened maybe earlier this month. And this is no surprise. Google has said, Q1 2022, Pixel 3 will get its last update. On this device, it offers that 3-year update window. And so we're there. So it's not like this is a surprise. But we've got the Pixel 6, which is Google's latest and greatest. Google promised an additional 2 years of security updates on the 6. So you get the 3 years of regular updates and then an additional 2. So that's 5 total years. So that's better if you're on the 6. But if you have some of these older phones, your updates end, right? Your software, your security support is done. So even if the hardware itself is perfectly fine and operating like normal, you're stuck in this position of like, okay, well then do I give up protecting my security and my privacy as best as I can through these security updates in order to keep this phone? Or am I kind of put into this position where I have to plunk down money to buy a new device, even though this thing's just going to end up in a landfill? It's really confusing and kind of irresponsible. Google's response to this editorial, because it's definitely picked up some speed, they said, "We find that 3 years of security and OS updates still provides users with a great experience for their device." A great experience, even though it's not greater than the Pixel 6's additional 2 years of support, which would be 5 instead of 3, but still great, apparently. Which is just infuriating because it's just not Google.
It's just stop trying. Dismissive, yeah.
Yeah, it's dismissive and it's spin. But there is a reason behind this, because it's easy to look at this and think like, oh, well, they just don't want to support it. And while that might be true, there is kind of an underlying reason, is that the older Pixel phones, just taking Pixel phones as the example, are running Qualcomm's Snapdragon chip. And so, and now what we know about the Pixel 6, of course, is that Google, has created their Tensor chip. That's their internal chip. And so they are the ones, they control kind of like their whole destiny with that device. Well, the 3 does have the Qualcomm chip. That means that Qualcomm itself is part of the equation. And actually, historically speaking, Qualcomm at a certain point stops supporting its older chips. So that then puts the pressure on the OEM to actually, to decide, like, do we continue to support this beyond Qualcomm's support? And if so, we're going to have to throw some of our extra resources at it in order to make that happen. And that's not impossible. Other manufacturers do this. Samsung, in fact, has done this with its phones. Some of its phones are running its own Exynos chip. But here in the US, they're usually launched with the Qualcomm chip. And Samsung has extended support life on those devices. Other manufacturers have done it as well. So I think in the case of this, I think it comes back to how you communicate to your customers what they're worth to you. And when you're in Google's position, like if it takes extra resources to get, the previous, like the 3, the 4, and the 5, because you got 3, let's say you've got 3 devices or 3 families of devices left to support in the old school way. And it takes extra resources to do that, so that you are telling your customers, hey, by the way, we've made this change for the future, but we want to make it right for you because we care about you. Then you do that. You throw the resources at it. Other companies do it. And I don't understand why Google doesn't just do it. I realize it's easy for me to say, spend more money, but sorry, I probably just fired off a bunch of smart speakers.
I didn't even think
that
about
was unintentional. That was unintentional. But so it's easy for me to say that, but I just kind of feel like when you're in the position that Google is in, it's really trying to kind of make an impact with its hardware division. And I don't know, it's just lame. Like 3 years is not long enough. I'm sorry, it's just not. What do you think about this? Because you're on the other side. You're on the Apple side, where it's like the shining example.
Well, and I will say too, though, the other problem is right now with folks having the issues that we've seen with this latest Google Pixel. I lucked out, did not have any of those issues, but I hear every week on Windows Weekly about how both Paul Thurrott and Mary Jo Foley are constantly having issues with their Pixels. I know you didn't have too many issues, but it was enough that like there have been articles written about it and all that kind of stuff. And so if the company wants to continue to do this hardware that's supposed to be, the pure and best form of its own Android operating system, I really feel like they need to pull out all the stops as much as possible. And I agree that 3 years is not enough time. Yes, we update our phones all the time, but I've got, my grandma who's on a really old iPhone who's getting security updates for it. My mom is on an older iPhone who's still getting security updates for it. And for the most part, all of their, phones still work as they expect them to. And so, I agree. At the same time, I also do feel a little bit for Google here, given the difference in the chipset, that now going forward, they can make this a reality. And they're saying, this is something we can do now because we have control over it. Right. The average person isn't going to care about that, though. So it's like I can hear it, and then I can have some level of understanding and a level of empathy and go, oh, for me, that makes sense. Suddenly I understand. I get it. I realize that does make it an issue and why it's harder for you to be able to do that. But for the average person who's, rocking their phone, who now is concerned about what may or may not be, depending on who you talk to, a less secure platform on the whole. not getting the latest security updates can be a real issue. And you do want to make sure that you have those updates and that any of the bugs and leaks and all that kind of stuff aren't going to be a concern for you. So, yeah, I am like just straight down the middle on this because I understand Google and its decision in one way, but I also ultimately am pro-consumer and the person who has the device should get to have their device for as long as possible if they want to. And so, I'm of both minds about this one for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess I understand where Google is coming from too. It's not it's far easier for me to say, hey, why don't you just do this, than it is for Google, with the teams behind the scenes trying to make their current hardware just work, let alone make the previous hardware, have a longer life than they originally intended. I think at the end of the day, what it is I want Google to live up to what I feel like its potential is, and I feel like Google has the potential to be the kind of company that looks at this, recognizes it, and says, you know what, like, we're going to make this better for you, and not just from like a doing good perspective, but also from a taking care of their customers at a time when customer trust in the Google brand continues to fall. And I think this is just one of those things that if they did that, I don't know how much work it takes to do that, but if they did that, that gets them, that changes the mind of at least some people to say, okay,
kudos are worth more than kudos are worth more than they, I think, are valuing them. And if they could get some of those kudos, it would be good. I'm with you. When Apple does something that's a mistake that's not right, not only am among my people sort of the wailing wall for it, I kind of am the one who I'm the stand-in for them, the analog, but also it's a disappointment to me because it's like, that's not the company that I see when I think about that company. That's not the group of people creating things that I think are great, and the experience that I appreciate and enjoy and want to share with others. And so when you are doing that, you're not living up to what I expect of you. So I'm disappointed, and then the people around me are disappointed, which makes me more disappointed. So I totally get that feeling for sure. I understand where you're coming from with that.
So anyways, good article. Check it out, vice.com. You can find it. Google's forcing me to dump my perfectly good phone, and I'm sure you'll probably identify with it to one degree or another. No matter which phone is your daily driver, this is just a conversation that never goes away. I've been doing all about Android for almost 11 years now, and this is a conversation that just literally never goes away. And I wish that it would. I wish that we'd get to a point to where we'd be satisfied, but we're not quite there yet. But that's it for this week's episode of Tech News Weekly. We publish every Thursday at twit.tv/TNW. You can subscribe to the show in audio and video formats. Real quick, I just noticed that our survey for 2022 went live. This is the 2022 TWiT survey. It's where you can share your insight on what we're doing here. Feel free to answer as much or as little as you feel comfortable with. But this is all in an effort to provide just a better experience for you. Better shows. Are we doing things the way you like? This is just a way for us to know more about you and what your desires are and where you come with, like your perspective and where you're coming from. And it helps us to kind of identify things that we can do better and identify, maybe there's a show that we're missing out on that a lot of people would really care about. So it could impact the content that you get in the future. So twit.tv/survey22 is where you go. If you want to help us out with that, we'd really appreciate it. That's live right now.
Yes, thank you so much for heading to that link and filling that stuff out. It won't take you very long. In testing the survey, I took it about 8 times, and it didn't take me very long to take it about 8 times.
It doesn't take long.
It's a pretty easy thing to do. If you would like to get all of our shows ad-free, well, you can do that. What? You can do that? Yes, you can do that. You just check out Club Twit for $7 a month. Check out what all you get. You get every single one of Twit's shows ad-free. Super awesome. You head there, you have a like customized link or feed for all the different shows. You also get access to the TWiT Plus bonus feed that has extra content you won't find anywhere else, behind the scenes, before the show, after the show, but also the AMAs. There've been lots of AMAs. There's one coming up with Georgia Dow. That'll make its way into that TWiT Plus bonus feed. I know Ant's populating that thing with stuff all the time. And then access to the Discord server. If you aren't sure what Discord is, don't worry. If you've ever used Microsoft Teams or Slack or one of those kinds of communication platforms, you'll hop into Discord and be ready to rock. It's just a place to chat with your fellow Club TWiT members, but also those of us here at TWiT. Fun place to hang out. twit.tv/clubtwit. For all of that, $7 a month, super easy to check out. And then we also heard that some folks wanted to subscribe to their favorite shows individually, weren't concerned about all that extra stuff. You can do that. In Apple Podcasts, you just look up Tech News Weekly and you find the audio feed, and then you can subscribe for $2.99. When you do so, you'll get the ad-free version of the audio feed. So $2.99 a month for that if you'd like to in Apple Podcasts. If you want to tweet at me, I'm at Mikah Sargent. I'm at Mikah Sargent on many social media networks, or head to chihuahua.coffee, CHIHUAHUA.coffee, where I've got links to the places I'm most active online. You can check out my other show, iOS Today, on Tuesdays, which I do with Rosemary Orchard. And as I've said, soon, hopefully in the next couple of months, I'll return to the Tech Guy show on Saturdays with Leo Laporte. Jason Howell, what about you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Jason Howell. Of course, I'm here doing shows. All That Android is my other kind of regular show. Next week, Leo is out. So Mikah and I are going to be filling in on some of his shows. I'm going to be on Security Now and This Week in Google. And then you've got MacBreak Weekly.
MacBreak Weekly and Windows Weekly.
And Windows Weekly. There you go. So you get more of us next week. So look forward to that. Big thanks to everybody at the studio helping us do this show. John Ashley, Burke, John Slanina, everybody there. We couldn't do it without you, and we couldn't do it without you. Yes, watcher or listener. We appreciate you, and we thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on Tech News Weekly. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
So you got yourself the brand new latest and greatest iPhone or Samsung smartphone because you heard about all of the beautiful photography those things can create. But for some reason, you're just not quite getting it done when you try to make your photos. Or you got yourself a brand new camera because you were interested in getting started in photography, but your little new inexpensive camera still isn't quite cutting it. Well, you need to check out my show, Hands-on Photography, here on TWiT. I'm going to show you how to be a better photographer and a better post-processor, and quite frankly, just help you get the most out of that new camera that's either on your phone or the brand new one that you just got for your birthday or gifts or what have you. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So head on over to twit.tv/hop. That's twit.tv/HOP and subscribe today.